Welcome to Inspired Artist Podcast with me, Porter Singer. In this episode, I am with Maggie Converse, and she is a bereavement coordinator for hospice and an end-of-life doula and educator and grief companion. It is super apt that we are talking about grief in this episode, and that's actually what she does. It's really amazing how paths lead together. But we met through a mutual friend, Joshua Stoddard, and we actually met at his, I guess we would call it like an end-of-life ceremony or a wake. I'm not quite sure what it was formally, a memorial. I thought it would be really interesting to have her perspective on the podcast as to what it is to guide people through grief and through end of life. And, something that we don't talk about a lot, I think, in our culture. And I think that we should, because it is a normal and natural part of living. Yeah. Oh, and also she lives in Hood River, Oregon with her 2 dogs. So, here we go. Let's get into it. It's kind of amazing to meet someone at a memorial who happens to work in death.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much in that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you like think that you see, because I look at your feed on Instagram, and obviously a lot of what you share is about grieving and moving grief through your body and things like that. Do you feel like you see life through kind of a unique lens to people that you are around?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I can find myself as like one of the only people in the room or a group that wants to like dig really deep and talk about these like not so popular things to talk about. And then when I do find people that maybe have experienced a really profound or a big loss or gone through something, loss being like a death, or there's other ways that we experience loss in our lives. It's kind of like, oh, yes, like you speak the same language as me. So, yeah, sometimes I feel like I see the world a lot through the lens of just knowing that death is a part of life. It's a part of being human. Totally. And so is grief.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember listening to, I think the first time that I realized this, well, I guess it was like in twofold. The first time I realized that I didn't know anything about death and it was like shocking was when my really close friend died in college. And I remember somebody mentioning like how strange our relationship to death was at that point, and how like, it always seems like it's like this shock, and yet it's an inevitability, but we always sort of see it as like, oh my God, how did this, like a meteor, just, fell to the earth or something. It's almost like, it almost feels like that sometimes. And then like, what was it? There was a man in the Kundalini yoga community who died, and he was about the same age as my friend. And I remember listening to a podcast where his wife was talking to, wait, no, actually she wasn't on the podcast. I'm talking about, she had shared the podcast, but they were talking about death in a way that I had never heard it talked about. And one of the things that they talked about was just how difficult it seems to be for people to talk to people who are grieving. Like nobody seems to know what to say, or they feel they're going to say the wrong thing, or they're going to make it worse, or, so I think people sort of shy on the side of like not saying much at all, which can feel pretty alienating to someone who's grieving. What is your like experience with that? You must have a lot.
sometimes, I mean, I think I have like the same amount of, I have experience like anyone else would. And I think in the last like 5 or 6 years of going through some losses, I mean, I see how people reached out or didn't reach out or said things or didn't say things to me, and have reflected on how like, oh, that was me when my friend's mom died, and I didn't want to mess up. Like I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And even now it's still like a practice. And obviously like part of my work, like I have to make calls and visits to the bereaved. But even with like personal losses, there's still this like discomfort around like there's this call to reach out, like that I want to reach out, I want to say something, and I do now. But I still have this, there's like a part of me that's still like, but what if it makes it worse? Like, what if it's the wrong thing? And, I think there are some things that are like more helpful than others to say to a grieving person. But I mean, from being on the grieving person end of things, it's like, just, I'm here. Like, I'm thinking, like, just the most simple things can be the most impactful. But yeah, there's still that, like, I do reach out. I will say something, and I still have this little part of me that's like, but I mean, I was writing an email this week to the wife of someone who was kind of like an uncle to me, my father's best friend. And I had to keep like reminding myself, like, just from the heart, like, you don't have to go back and edit it and make it perfect, and just like from your heart. So yeah, I think we don't know what to say to people. And I remember being when Josh died, like really wanting people to reach out a lot more than they did. And also trying to have that compassion of like, oh yeah, we live in a really grief illiterate society. Like, people are scared to talk to the grieving person. Like I was scared to say the wrong thing. I still get that way. Yeah. I kind of forgot like the original question.
No, that was that. I was just writing what you were saying. People are scared of the grieving. Oh, I'll go back and listen. Yeah, no, and I think you had a post that was really sweet on kind of on this topic, or you asked people what the most surprising thing was for them after someone had died, I think. And I can't remember if you said the most surprising thing someone said. I don't think so, but I spoke about like the most surprising thing that someone had said to me about someone dying. Yeah, it brings up all sorts of emotions, because what this person had said was she was basically angry with me for the way that I had delivered the news, which was really a very surprising response. But we respond in all different kinds of ways. And I love what you were saying about having compassion for people. And I definitely had that thought about like, wow, I wonder like how appropriate some of the things I said for people who were grieving were. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It
We don't, well, I think we all like learned in our ways growing up, like how to talk about death, how to like deal with, quote unquote, deal with death and deal with grieving people. And so I picked, like, for a while was just kind of doing what was modeled until like, yeah, I learned differently and experienced like what it was like to be on the grieving end, and like, wow, what would be really helpful? What would be supportive right now?
Yeah. Do do you are you mostly guided by your experience of being with people, or is there like kind of a framework that you go to, or how do you handle that?
Um, a lot of it is guided by, I guess it's most of it is guided by the person. Um, there is a framework that I've been working on a training in with Amy Wright Glenn. Um, it's just called space holding, and as I've been doing it, it's really validated a lot of what I've already kind of been feeling like this is how I've kind of been showing up for people. But it's really like allowing the person that is grieving to lead, allowing them to teach me about their grief rather than me telling them this is what you should do, or like this is where you should be. We're 3 months out. So very like grieving person centered. And also, I have a background in teaching yoga, and I dance throughout a lot of my life. And so also incorporating, and this is also part of the holding space training, incorporating a little bit of body-based practices, like just bringing a hand to your heart, or maybe guiding someone to notice sensations, like where grief might be showing up. So I often try to integrate some of that if people are open to it and comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that you are working mostly with people who share kind of like a similar culture to yours, or is culture ever kind of a difficult thing for you in terms of like not understanding maybe how a culture grieves or deals with loss?
Yeah, for the most part, oh, it has been similar-ish. And also I often find myself learning a lot about different ways that different cultures grieve, different ways that that people grieve,
Mhm.
or their viewpoints on grief. And having to take this like step back and really letting them lead, and not like intrude, like never intruding on their process, or their perspective. Like that's not what I'm there to do.
Do you find it draining? I'm just wondering, like, what are your boundaries around that? Like, are you empathic? Is it kind of, is there a mixture that goes on? Do you have to kind of clear, like, what's your practice around that?
I do find it draining. I mean, it's such like heart-centered work. Yes, it can be draining. I try to take breaks. Like when I'm working for hospice,
Mhm.
I could have a day where I potentially could make like 12 calls, but I know that if I do that, I'm not going to be present. So I try to have like space between conversations with people or visits. If I'm in a place, if I'm doing it from home, like going outside, taking breaks, or even lying down and resting. I've also found, it can be it can be draining, and it can also be uplifting when somebody is like really in touch with their grief, when they're able to verbalize it, they're able to share it, they're able to recognize, like they have awareness around it. And it can be draining because I think I get frustrated when I hear people kind of bulldozing over their grief.
Mm.
But I'm never gonna like try to push them to go toward it if they're not ready. I think there's just a part of me that wants so badly for them to, find that safe person or safe group of people to be able to grieve with and share about it. But I can't always do that. So it can get and does get draining. But I think just I do a lot of like self-care practices. I'm pretty good at that now. So
Yeah, you have to be, I'd imagine.
yeah. And
What?
also there's a component to it that we're all human, and it's been hard this year after Josh passed away. It's been difficult. And I've noticed this almost like constant reminder that, so many people are grieving.
Mm.
Um, so there's almost this sense of like community in it, and just having these conversations with people and listening
Mm.
and hearing their insights, and I learn from them.
Mm. Yeah. What got you into this type of work?
People ask me that, and part of it felt like a calling. In 2019, I was feeling really drawn to want to learn more about death and dying and end of life. I think I had also been exploring my own grief that I had not sat with. Um, and, there were events in my life. There were many like end of relationships that I'd never grieved.
Mm.
Um, I lost my cousin died. He was 32. I think this was like 5 years ago. And it was very sudden and tragic. And going to the funeral felt like walking into like a movie. Like it just didn't feel real, and that this could happen. And that certainly kind of was like this pivot moment of just thinking about death a lot more, and like what happens and what is our relationship with people and animals that we've lost.
Mm.
And then I think just this exploration of my own grief, and like being in my own grief and recognizing how important that was, how I needed to do that. And so a lot of it felt like I think there were little things that kind of nudged me in the direction. And then it also just felt like this calling, like I want to learn about this. I want to immerse myself in this. I want to educate people. I want to hold space for this.
Mm.
So
Yeah. What does what have you learned about death, about grief? Like,
it's like so real. It's so, oh my gosh. Well, I feel like I learned a lot. 2020, 2021 was like studying and learning. And of course, COVID, right? And there was like all this loss in COVID. And like just like reading books and watching and listening to podcasts and watching films about death and dying and grief and like soaking it all in, kind of learning and realizing like, wow, we don't talk about this. Like, or you'll have like maybe a little bite-sized conversation about it. And just noticing the amount of discomfort around death and dying and grief. And I learned that I still have like discomfort. I'm still afraid of dying. Like learning about this doesn't make that go away. But I think just really seeing like how it's all kind of swept under the rug. It's kept like hidden. Everything, so much in our society is about like anti-aging. So I think a big part of my learning was also about like embracing the aging process, embracing like the changing body. And then I think when it was, so I had spent all this time studying and reading and I did a 9-month course called 9 Keys with my teacher, Elizabeth Bazin. And that ended in November 1, 2021. And I was kind of all set to go. I had these like ideas about being a death midwife, and I was holding like grief groups, and I was going to continue that and do more one-on-one. And then we lost Josh, and it just was like, whoa, like, wait a minute, like this is so real. This is so hard. And this is not something to like be rushed. There's so much to learn in like studying death and dying, but then also like being really present for like our own losses is an initiation, is an education in itself, if we let it be.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah. What would you say is something besides, I guess, people kind of shoving it under the rug? What is your like vision for what grieving could look like? Maybe I phrased that wrong. I was saying like, besides not shoving it under the rug. I'm not sure if I said that. What is your vision?
Oh gosh. The first thing that comes up is grieving more openly in community. Not even in a dedicated grief group, but I mean, there have been times this year when I've been at work and I have cried in front of my coworkers, or been talking to a friend and allowing myself to get to that kind of messy place of grief in front of them. I think the vision is just more like it's communal, intentional spaces for grief. And I mean, it is so hard to be just like in the grocery store and you hear a song, or you see like the person's favorite snack and you just start crying and you're like, oh no, I think that's kind of a lot of people's first response, is to be worried that like somebody's going to see you and it's going to seem weird, or they're going to be uncomfortable. But I think just kind of like inviting like more of that. Yeah, just this like more communal, more public. That's part of it.
There's there's an very unnatural sense, I think, of decorum that maybe comes from the British or Protestantism or something. I don't know what the origins or just our like idea of what it means to be civilized, I guess. But I remember feeling like deeply ashamed of bringing my baby to the grocery store
Mm.
when I first had a child, because I wasn't like, I was like, oh my God, is he gonna start crying? I don't think. And then he did, and I had to like it was brutally, like, I could have never imagined. I mean, and that sort of felt the same. I mean, the same, I guess, in sense of like display of emotion. Like we don't really tolerate, and we're sort of like self-correcting because probably the people around us would not judge us as much as we judge ourselves. But yeah, it's rough because I'm also rereading the Four Agreements, and he talks about like domestication and how we domesticate ourselves and others, and like that's part of it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like making ourselves like neat and tidy and presentable. And then that's just this like illusion and this mask of like what's really going on inside. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes it matches what's going on inside, but I wonder if more of the time it doesn't, it's not like a true, or that time when you did go to the grocery store and you were, had your baby and I don't know, like what you were wearing, or you felt like unkempt or something, like maybe that was matching your insides and people were like getting to see that. But yeah, that pressure to be like, I forget the word you used. It was the decorum, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's on both sides of the spectrum, I think. Like it's just as kind of unacceptable to just like burst out in joy in the middle of the grocery store.
Totally. People, yes.
Yeah.
I wish it wasn't unacceptable. I would love to see more of that, or somebody like pulling beans off the shelf and just wailing. But then I would hope somebody would be near them to just hold space for them,
Yeah.
while they have that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you were saying that, I'm like, how can we, because I'm sort of processing this from my own childhood right now, but like, how can we expect people to hold our emotions if we don't feel deserving of expressing them? You know, it's like
Yeah,
big work.
that's big work. Yeah, I don't know all the answers for that, but that certainly has come up so often. Like, yeah, can you hold space for your own emotions? Can you allow them? The ones that you have like maybe shame around, or you feel like you shouldn't express. Um, yeah, and I don't know, like, and I think it does help to have like people that maybe encourage that, whether it's a therapist or a really good friend or a partner or somebody that might like, yeah, encourage um the kind of like sitting with those emotions and being with those emotions.
Yeah. What is the thought process or like the things people say when they kind of shame themselves or decide that they don't want to go there? Or do you know like what those, do you see
Like
patterns?
when I'm talking to people,
Yeah.
people apologize a lot.
Mm.
They apologize for crying, um, which I've done. I try not to do it as much now, but um, or they'll say like, this is, I don't know if I should say this or not. Kind of they'll like preface the way that they're feeling. Like some people feel like relief when their person
Mm.
passes away because they've been like a caregiver for 10 years or whatever the reasoning, they feel like ashamed of that feeling or that they're still angry towards that person. So there can often be like apologizing or prefacing like what they're about to share as like, this is so out there, or this might be wrong. And also kind of thinking like this thinking of like, there's no way no one else is experiencing this. And I'm like, like actually it's not uncommon.
Right.
But
Well, that's what happens when something feels so shameful and people make it secretive, is that everybody thinks that they're the only ones.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're the only one.
That's really well, hopefully that's changing. Do you feel like there's more, I don't know, understanding or compassion that people are finding?
I feel like grief is people are talking about it more. There's so many more resources. And I can only speak to like the people that I work with or speak about, those experiences, what I've heard. It's one, small portion of the population. But I will have conversations where, like just this week, I was speaking with a man that I've been kind of in regular contact with, who is, realizing that, hey, like this grief, it's a good thing. Like he was kind of saying that this is a good thing for me. Like I'm getting this education, like I'm learning, I'm kind of learning to be with it. And that it's changing my life. So I think I see both. I see people that are really like embracing all the different emotions, the complexity, and I see people that are just not ready to go there and might not ever, and that's okay. Like that's their experience, their experience to have. Yeah, I believe it's changing. It's going to take a long time, I think. But I believe things are shifting.
Yeah. One of the things that I, if I'm about to preface it, sort of a strange thing to say. Um, I feel like when I'm in grief, there's like a kind of a relief in its vulnerability, because I give myself a break on a lot of fronts that I don't usually. And it's kind of a softening for me that makes me a little bit, yeah, more gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've experienced that personally, like just getting to that gentle space. I almost when I've synesthesia, so I will like get visuals of
oh.
things. And with it, I just see this like, to get to that gentle place, to get to that soft place, there is kind of like an edge, or this like some kind of a barrier. And sometimes we can get there by like that relief of crying or screaming or like moving. But yeah, that there is that, just it's so vulnerable and so soft, and there is that capacity to be like so tender with ourselves. And we can also tell ourselves like, this is wrong, I shouldn't be feeling this much, like I don't know all the science. There is science about how our brain functions when we're in that deep grief, but our brain isn't able to always like go into that more logical thinking of like being able to tell ourselves like this is totally okay, that all you can do today is like make yourself some toast, sleep on the couch, go to the bathroom, feed the kids, walk the dog, whatever, just the basic, like the brain isn't always able to, we're not always able to like remind ourselves of that when we're in that place.
Hmm.
I wonder if it comes with practice, maybe.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, maybe. It's interesting. Well, also, I would imagine, I feel like the normal way or the way that we kind of evolved to be human was in communities where we would have had multiple generations. There would have been deaths going on. There would have been people who were sort of expert at like the whole process, who were there to like hold space for the community.
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
maybe they were the brain for everybody, like this is normal, everyone.
absolutely. Or if not, like there, yeah, that there was a break, there were people that could validate, like this is
Hmm.
normal, this is okay.
Yeah.
Like I'll make the food right now. Like you don't have to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So much about the way that it's so interesting how we are. Because I feel like the way that we've evolved and then like the way that we choose to live our lives now is there's such ends of a spectrum. And well, most of us, I guess some people live in communities,
Yeah.
um, but like we try to kind of like wrap our head around all these issues that I feel like wouldn't really be issues if we were living kind of a more natural existence. But I suppose it's a fun challenge for the modern human.
A fun challenge. I totally, yeah. I mean, I keep going back to referencing like when Josh died, and I just think of like I live alone. I don't live with a partner. I don't have a roommate. Um, and yeah, in those early days,
He's your neighbor, right?
what?
Is your neighbor?
In Portland, we lived in the
Yeah.
same,
Okay.
yeah, but I not out here. But in those early days, funny you bring up neighbors, like neighbors brought over food, and people offered to like walk the dogs, things that I didn't even think I would need,
Hmm.
things I didn't even think I would need. Um, but just that like community aspect of people showing up. Somebody dropped off like a gift card for at a little food truck, and that's where that like and I had people that had gone through similar kinds of losses who were like, yeah, this is really hard, like just kind of validating that, kind of serving as like the brains when I didn't. I just felt like, like, and you don't even know like what's up or down, it's everything is like turned upside down. So yeah, having those other people is really crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really sweet. I'm glad that happened. Um,
Yeah, yeah. There were some beautiful like acts of kindness and generosity, and from people that I wasn't that close with. I know them better now,
yeah. Huh.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting who, I guess, who shows up, um, yeah. Do you, oh, here's something I wondered actually in the beginning. Are you kind of young in the space that you're in, or is you are you like, do you have peers that are kind of the same age of you as you in this bereavement griefs in hospice and stuff like that? Is it more,
Mm,
I don't know, I'm imagining.
yeah. Through the program, through Nine Keys, I know there are a lot of people that are around, I'm 39, that are my age, or even maybe 10 years younger, maybe a little bit younger. And then older. I do like a friend of mine did say to me recently, she was like, "You're so young to be in this. Like, what got?" But I never really considered that. Um, yeah, I think I see more and more people of like all different ages in this space. And I think it's needed. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's another kind of misunderstanding that most of us have about death too, is that it's an old person's thing, but
I
it's
know.
happened to anyone. Yeah.
I know it's so true. Yeah. That's whenever people have asked me about that, like that you're so young to be in this. And I'm like, I'm gonna die one day too. It's just because I'm like of this age doesn't mean, yeah. And I think that just goes back to like the narrative around death that like we don't really, unless maybe you're in a situation where you experience loss at a younger age, um, you maybe don't think about it that much, or you think of it as like the elders in your life or your grandparents or, it's something that happens to old people. And I think we're blessed if we get to die when we're old. um, yeah, there was something else that was coming up, but I forgot, and maybe it'll come back. Um, kind of pertaining to that. Yeah, just that like that kind of death awareness. Mm.
I have, I don't know. So I'm the same age as you. I just realized.
Woo.
1983. Yeah. Okay. Um, but it only happened like a few years ago that I started having this thing where I would grieve living people, like as if in my mind, like just sort of kind of wrapping my head around the fact that one day they're going to die.
Yeah.
So weird. It's like, what is this switch that happened in my brain? Is that something that people tell you about? Or like, I'm curious if I'm the only one you've ever heard of doing this.
Well, I have totally done that. I feel like there's a term for it. I want to say there's a term for it, but I don't know off the top of my head, but now I'm curious and want to go look after this. Um, but yeah, it's like, I don't know if that's anticipatory grief. It could be, maybe that is anticipatory grief. Just that, like, I mean, I do that with my dogs. like, like, yeah, and people just imagining like if they die before me, it's just that feeling of like what's that going to be like and feeling that grief. Um, yeah, I wonder if that falls under the anticipatory grief. Because when I think of anticipatory grief, I think of it as like someone is terminally ill and, they have a year to 5 years and you're kind of like preparing and going through that like reality that you're going to lose them and
Hmm.
kind of know when roughly.
Mm.
But I almost feel like it's the same because you're going to lose them. Like we're going to
Yeah.
lose them at some point.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that as but yeah, that's a very similar, although, you have to put a little bit more imagination into it, but it's a very, yeah, similar kind of thing. In a sense, we're all terminal,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are.
we'll all terminate.
Yeah, that some people know, like, okay, I have this much time left, and then some people don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My partner is part Spanish, and apparently in Spain, if someone is terminally ill, the doctor's policy is not to tell the patient, but just their family. So it's their family's choice whether they inform. Isn't that crazy?
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Very
That kind of breaks my heart. I mean, yeah.
weird. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the logic is that you wouldn't want to know if you're terminally ill, but then everybody starts treating you differently. I mean, that must be a very,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
who wouldn't catch on?
Right. Right. Or wouldn't you notice, like, oh, I'm continuing to like progress in this direction. My
Yeah,
body's deteriorating.
yeah,
Wow. I didn't know that. Thanks for
yeah.
that.
Well, that's according to him. Maybe somebody, if you're out there and you research that, maybe that's not true at all. But I just thought the idea of that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's also in a culture where euthanasia is legal. So,
Like do you know the details of it? Like no, okay.
no, I don't. I know a friend who went there because of that, to have that option. Um, but I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something to research, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's such a like another big topic, like death with dignity or medical aid in dying, and that it is available in some states in our country, but there are certain parameters around it, and yeah.
In Portland? I mean, in Oregon? Yeah. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. Well, do you have, like, on that note, there was not like there was not an on that note, I don't think, throughout this whole throughout this whole conversation. But do you have anything that you would like to share before we close?
I mean, I appreciate having this conversation. I feel like just being able to talk about grief and death and dying, it's a really vast like topic, and so I appreciate that, and just being able to exchange ideas and thoughts, and also just that I acknowledge like every person's experience with grief is, there are things like we talked about where it's like, you're probably not the only person that has like felt this feeling like, but the timeline, the way that people move through it, cope with it, I think people can sometimes, what I hear is they give themselves a timeline of, by this point, I'm going to be moved on. But so much of grief, I don't believe we ever like move on and forget about it and like, oh, I'm done with that. But it's like living with it, and sometimes it's like beside us, sometimes it feels like it's really just in our whole being, the grief. Sometimes it's like behind us. So just learning how to live with it. It's such a human experience. It's like an initiation. Francis Weller talks about that a lot. So yeah, I believe in like people like finding the way to learn how to live with it. Kind of like weaving it in and out of their life.
Yeah, that's such a great reminder. Thank you. I would invite people to follow you on Instagram. You have some really great prompts, especially if you're interested in continuing this conversation further. You share some really cool, engaging stuff, and I'll share your handle in the show notes. Yeah, thank you all for joining us in this episode. If you have any feedback or questions about this episode, please feel free to email me at inspiredartistpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning into the podcast, y'all. Please like, subscribe, rate, comment, whatever the platform you listen to podcasts on offers you as a way to let its algorithm know that you're enjoying these episodes. That really helps. Also, there's some links in the podcast description notes that allow you to support the podcast in a way that benefits you and us. So please check those out. And if you'd like to stay in touch with me, you can sign up for my mailing list at portersinger.com. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye.